The Fletcher Seventh-day Adventist Church is a Christian people who believe Jesus is the Son of God, the hope of the world, who died on the cross to redeem us all for eternal life with God. Our purpose is to lift Jesus up and love people in. Visit our website at www.fletchersda.org. And now be blessed by the Holy Spirit as you listen to a Bible message.
Today's scripture reading is found in Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 6, if you'd like to follow along. I'm reading from the New International Version. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye, and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and then turn and tear you to pieces. May the Lord add his blessing.
Let's pray. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight. God, you who are the rock that we stand on, and you are the Redeemer who rescues us when we've fallen off that safe place. God, we love you because you first loved us, Jesus. Speak in this place. We ask this in your name. Amen. So there was a man named Harry Frazee. Any sports fanatics know who that is? Raise your hands if you know who Harry Frazee is. Is anyone in here that knows the name Harry Frazee? Maybe not. Okay. Well, he was the owner of the Red Sox way back. And he had this baseball team. That was kind of what he had some of his money invested in. But he also had other ventures. One of those ventures was Broadway. He liked Broadway plays, Broadway productions. And so he was trying to get a new one up off the ground, and it just wasn't working. And he realized he needed some more capital to invest in that show to really get it going, and some advertising and such. And so he started looking around through his like little kingdom of economics there to find out where he could get some extra cash. And as he was kind of going through his books, he realized he had a baseball player that was a decent guy. I mean, he was worth a little bit of money. I mean, he wasn't terrible, but certainly, he could find another one. He had just picked this guy up recently, and he thought, what, this guy's been hitting some decent numbers here. Why don't I just sell this guy to someone else if someone's willing to pick him up? So Harry, owner of the Red Sox, asks around and finds that the Yankees are willing to pick up this gentleman for $125,000. Again, back in this day, it's a lot of money. And so he's like, what a great deal. I kind of ripped these guys off. I get all this cash for, a decent baseball player, invest that money in my show, get that off the ground. I can always replace this guy, Mr. Herman, his baseball player. And so the deal's made, his life goes on, and as the years start to elapse, he starts to realize the very foolish decision he made, because the gentleman that he sold to the Yankees was a guy named Babe Ruth. And Babe Ruth went on to become, probably, arguably the best baseball player in history. That if anyone ever eclipses him, it's going to be an amazing day. It probably won't happen. Even in the day of steroids, no one does what Babe Ruth did. And so for the next 85 years, the Yankees dominated baseball. For the next 85 years, the Red Sox never won anything as they watched the numbers roll in. He sold something that was worth quite a bit of money. He got a decent deal, but did he misjudge the situation? I think we'd all agree that he absolutely would have preferred to keep Babe Ruth on the Red Sox and have a couple wins under their belt in that 85-year period rather than just get his nameless show off the ground. And our world is full of these stories. The children's story was beautiful because we've all been there, haven't we? A restaurant that looks nasty and you go in there and it's the best food you've ever had. I've started to realize that's kind of a norm with restaurants. The dirtier it is, within reason, right? You don't want to get MRSA. That's not cool. I mean, maybe if the tacos are good, sometimes it's worth it. It's a price to pay. You pay the price for good tacos. But I mean, the kind of more run down a place is, oftentimes the better food they're putting out because they're just, bringing in what they've got and they've learned how to make these delicious tacos or pupusas or something, right? Or that friend that you met in high school, again, it was a beautiful story for her to be that open because we've all been there, haven't we? That person in school, we're like, that person's an idiot. What an idiot. And you find out later that they're actually quite interesting. Or they go on in life, as the stories go, and they end up founding some software company. And, 20 years later, you're all showing up. What have you done with your life? Oh, I mean, some mediocre stuff. And there's this guy that everyone picked on, and, he owns Microsoft now. You're like, you're so dumb. Like, we misjudge life so routinely, so excessively, so regularly, that it would seem that this commandment of Jesus would be the easiest one to follow, right? Like, realize that you don't always get it right. Oh, that should be obvious to all of us. Realize that you don't always understand somebody. Realize that you don't always understand the situation where your logic just cuts right through and you know what's going on. You don't know. And we understand that. We hear these stories. Oh, what a foolish guy to sell Babe Ruth, right? But the reality is that this is probably one of the hardest commandments that I've ever found in my life to actually live out in my story. And I'm guessing I'm not alone in that. To where we can look into other people's stories, we can look into other situations and feel like we have just this clarity that gives us the right to make these judgments. And then not only are we wrong, sometimes we're so wildly wrong, we cause major damage in those situations. And so we want to spend the time we have here today to look at what Jesus is talking about here. As we're going through this series, Jesus Talks Tough, we're looking at some of the teachings of Jesus that are maybe not as focused on, that you aren't going to hear preached in sermons very often, and trying to maybe pick out some things that we can learn for ourselves. For what was Jesus really doing? Because Jesus did not come along just to affirm this world. He said, I didn't come to bring peace, I came to bring a sword, right? He came to kind of mess stuff up. And the longer you follow Jesus, you realize that's exactly what he does in our lives, isn't it? He kind of messes stuff up. He kind of swings that sword and cuts stuff up a little bit. He'll bloody our nose, but it's always to bring us healing. I was a songwriter I love, and he was speaking somewhere at one point, and he made that comment in his life. He said that God is kind of frustrating. He's this weird person you can't categorize. He'll bloody your nose, but he'll give you a ride home on his bike afterwards, right? You're just not sure what to do with him. And so as we look at this today, I hope that we're able to unpack and understand maybe what he's trying to say to us. And so I just want to start out right at the beginning of Matthew 7. If you want to turn there with me, we're going from verses 1 to 6, just kind of straight through here. But we're going to start with the first two verses, and it says this: Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. So Jesus speaks into this audience that's listening, and he speaks into our world, and he basically says the posture that we take towards the world is the posture the world's going to take back towards us. Have you found that in life? Some religions call it karma, where what you do tends to come back to you. The way that we live tends to come back to us. And we generally read this as saying that God's going to judge us the way that we judge others. And I think that's part of it. I think God, if we live a life of grace, God's going to respond to us with grace. If we live a life that's harsh and critical and condemning, that might be what comes back towards us. But I think that even beyond that, what Jesus is doing is just recognizing a reality of human life. And that when we live a life of generosity and kindness, doesn't that tend to come back towards us? When we live a life of harsh criticism, that tends to kind of color the air around us. I remember a teacher I had in college. He was just super obsessed with everybody being on time. He was one of these teachers that would give you this lecture about how his time is important and he's giving it to you and your parents are paying for this time and that's important, right? It's yeah, it's all true. But he was just super ridiculous. I mean, you roll in, 1 second late and he's just up in your face. Yeah, you're late. Someone comes in late, and this is college, so some of them are a little bit older, come rolling in. I mean, they're adults. They made a decision to be late or something went wrong with their day. They're having to drive in, right? Just on them. You screwed up. You're late. Lecture again. So you can imagine our glee when he came rolling in 15 minutes late one day. We're like, oh, yes, the gods have thrown us a softball, and we're going to swing at that real hard. Home run. And the funny thing was, or the ironic thing or sad thing was that he didn't even take it. I mean, it was good nature. We're like, oh, look who's late today. And he didn't just take it with oh, that's funny, true. He kind of got super flustered. Started trying to make excuses. Well, I had a reason. Blah, blah. We're like, oh yeah, we all had reasons too. Didn't tend to matter, right? So the minute this guy made a mistake, we were going to jump all over him because that's the posture he'd taken towards us. There was this antagonism that kind of brought that out of our own hearts. It made us antagonistic. And sure, at the end of the day, that was our decision. But I had other teachers that were very kind and generous, and if they rolled in a few minutes late, you weren't going to, poke at them. They weren't poking at you. You're all just in it together. Jesus says, basically, you get to choose your own adventure. Did any of you read those books when you were kids? Like, if you want to climb off the sinking boat, turn to page 93. If you want to stay on the sinking boat and be stupid, turn to the end, because that means you die, right? Like, you turn to different parts of the book. Anyone read those? They're kind of a unique little thing for a while. I don't think they even print them anymore, but you'd like flip through the book to different pages, and you chose how the story went, right? So you had a little bit of control, like what was going to happen in this story. You're like one of the characters. It's kind of a neat idea. But Jesus kind of sets that up. He says, in your life, in the story you're living, you can't control everything. But there is a bit of an element that we do have a control to choose like our own adventure. Flip to page 9 if you want to be kind today to this person who maybe doesn't deserve it. Flip to page 10 if you want to be as harsh as you possibly could and think the worst of that person's possible options of why they just did what they did. Choose your own adventure. And he says something that I think we've all started to realize in our lives, and that comes back. I lived in Michigan during grad school, and I was in this kind of quirky little house, this nice little old house, but it was right next door to a convenience store, this little gas station. And in that community, I started to realize there were quite a few different like group homes. It was kind of a poorer part of town, and so there were some cheap houses people could buy and use as a group home for people who needed some in-home care. And so these people would walk by my house, going to this gas station to get some soda or get some snacks or something. And other people just that lived in that area would do the same. It was convenient. But there was one man in general that kind of stuck out a little bit. He was this really, really crazy-looking guy. He was probably like 6'5" or 6", really tall guy, but really lanky, really kind of gaunt face, like really stood out, like you would notice him in a crowd. But on top of that, he had these big old thick glasses, and he preferred to wear ladies' clothing for whatever reason that spoke to him in the morning, and tend to put on a nice little dress and some big, plastic jewelry and walk to the store to get his grape soda. And he lived in one of these group homes. I don't know what his, handicap was or what his challenges were, but, that's where he lived, and he went to get his soda. And so he'd walk right by my house, and I'd see him walking by. I'm like, man, this guy is so quirky. Like, what in the world is going on? And one day I just went to say hi to him. Like, hey, what's up, man? Like, what's your name? And we started talking, and he wasn't severely handicapped. We were able to have a great conversation, and he told me where he lived, and he used to live in Chicago. And so, like, we struck up this kind of friendship. He would come by and say hi when I was outside mowing my lawn, and if I was outside with my dog, he'd just stop and say hi. One day he came by, and we were talking, and he told me he was wanting to get a soda, but he didn't have enough money. Just kind of low-key asking for some money, and I was like, oh, man, I'll help this guy out. I was like, yeah, well, I kind of wanted a Coke anyway. I'll walk over there with you. So I walked over, and I bought myself a Coke, caffeine-free. Just kidding. I'm not. But you can't judge today, or you're going to go to hell. I say whatever I want. I bought him his grape soda, his Fanta soda, and he came back to my yard, and we sat down, and we just kind of like sipped on our soda together and talked, right? So I went on a trip, asked one of my friends to take care of my dog and kind of looking on my house. And so he comes rolling in one day, drives up to this house where I live, gets out, him and his wife get out, and they're like rattling at the door with the key I'd given them to get in. And they suddenly hear this like booming voice behind them, "That's Jeff's house." And they're like, "What? That's Jeff's house." They like slowly turn, and there's a gigantic man in a dress glowering at them from the street, like super aggressively. "That's Jeff's house." And they're like, "Yeah, yeah, Jeff's our friend. We're gonna take care of his dog. So that's Jeff's house." Like, "Yeah, we got that. Yep. So we're just gonna go in." And he kind of takes a step forward towards them. "That's Jeff's house." And "Okay, we're gonna leave right now." So they climb in the car and like just leave, and they're just like dying laughing and also terrified. They're like, "What just happened?" And so they kind of went around the corner and watched him like kind of lumber on his way to the gas station, and came back and went inside and took care of my dog. But so I got back from my trip, and they're like, "You were never going to guess what happened." And so they start explaining it to me, and I just burst out laughing. I'm like, I know that guy. That's my buddy. I'm sorry. I didn't think to warn him that you were going in there. That's my alarm system, apparently. Super successful, because if it's not scary, it'll shock you. So either way, you're not sure what to do. Smoke screen. And I laughed about it, but then I felt like this kind of tender place in my heart suddenly for this man, that he had been willing to risk his safety to protect my stuff. I don't care about my stuff that much. But he felt so protective of me that he was willing to risk himself with these complete strangers. He didn't know what they were doing. For all he knew, they were breaking in. That's kind of what he assumed. And he was going to put himself between my stuff and them because he cared for me that much. I didn't ask him to do that. All I knew is that there's this quirky guy that went by, so I said hi to him and bought him some grape soda, and he threw himself between what he saw was danger to protect me. And Jesus reminds us that we have a choice in life what kind of vibe we're going to put out in the world, what kind of things like seeds we're going to sow around us. Are we sowing seeds of generosity and kindness? Are we sowing seeds of criticism and harshness? Because he says those tend to come back. And in the judgment, Jesus doesn't say this directly, but it seems that he's even hinting at that in the judgment we might face a bit of that. Were you gentle? Were you kind? Then don't worry. Were you harsh and unkind? Maybe say some extra prayers, But I don't think that's all Jesus is going at. Because he says there, don't judge. It's going to be back to you the way you did it. But he goes on and he says this. Verse 3. He says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, while all the time there is a plank in your eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And this is probably the most quoted part of this teaching, right? We hear that, I've got a plank in my eye. And it's used sometimes to, just kind of push back. If someone's saying that you're doing something stupid, it's easy to say, well, you're not supposed to judge, you have a plank in your eye. We're not supposed to make moral judgments of each other. Jesus says, don't judge, right? How dare you look at the problem in your other person's life when there's this bigger problem in your own life, right? He's saying, basically kind of putting us back a little bit. But the reality is that he's not saying don't make moral judgments, don't make discerning decisions, right? Because at the end of this little section we just read, right, there is a speck in the person's eye, right? Does he say there's no speck? He says, no, there is a problem in this person's eye. Yours is just bigger, but there's a problem. You see a legitimate problem. You see something that's going wrong in this person's life that could go better. He says the problem is not making that judgment call to say this person is being super unkind to their kids and they're a close friend, so maybe you could say, hey, maybe you should be a little kinder. It's kind of awkward to watch this. He's not saying that's a problem. He's talking about something very different. And the reality is this, that those of us that are the most quick generally to point out the failures of other people, real or imagined, are the ones of us that have the biggest problems in our own lives. Isn't that the case? Have you found that to be the case in your own life? When you're the lowest in your own life, when you're feeling threatened in your own life, you tend to lash out, right? We tend to get prickly to people around us when we're feeling insecure. That's the old story that people passed around of the bully that's so mean, but they found it really later on that he was just really hurting inside and wanted to be loved. And we found out in life that's not always true. Some people are just idiots and evil and unkind, and you just avoid them, right? But that also does tend to be the case. When we're feeling threatened, when we're feeling attacked ourselves, we tend to lash out. When there's a plank in our eye, we tend to start noticing the speck in your eye very quickly. And so basically what's happening here is these people that Jesus is talking to, maybe some of us, where we tend to be hypercritical and hyper aware of the things that are going wrong in that person, in that leadership team, in that boss at work, in that friend, in the spouse, in the child, right? In that kid sitting next to you in church just being a little too obnoxious, that old person that's doing something and annoying you when you're the kid, right? Whatever these different directions go, the reality is that the most of us who tend to be super sensitive to other people's failures, Jesus warns us that most likely we're the ones that are in the most need of help. And we're probably doing it unaware or aware as a diversionary tactic, right? And so we're basically robbing ourselves of the chance to find healing when we put ourselves in the posture of judgment over other people. when we find ourselves super critical, like, oh man, that person, I hate this thing they do. I hate the way our church does this thing. I hate the way that this person at the job I work at is this way. Like, and it starts to just like completely gnaw at us. I feel like Jesus is challenging us here to take a look into our own eye, right? The cool thing with this language here is that in the original Aramaic, which Jesus would have been teaching, and he wasn't speaking Greek, in the original Aramaic, he would have been speaking, the word for eye and the word for well is really the same word. And so a lot of scholars feel like that word eye was maybe not the best translation, that Jesus might have said well. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change the meaning that much. But I feel like it kind of takes it home a little more, because the well a person had, this would have been something very personal, your life, your home, right? And you walk by someone else's well, someone else's home, someone else's family, someone else's job, and you look down into their well, and there's like a speck of dirt down there, and you're like, there's dirt in your well. And he says that all the while the community is looking back at you, and there's your kids like dumping trash into your well at home. And they're like, why don't you go clean out your own well, man? Like, don't worry about mine. That posture that we find ourselves in. But the reality is that not only do we rob ourselves of the chance to find healing, but he goes further. He says, once you've removed that plank, he says the plank is removable, first of all. And he says, once that plank is removed, what does that allow you to do? To see. He says, now you do see clearly, right? Because once you have an obstruction in your eye, how likely is it that you're really seeing that person's problem in the first place anyway? You're probably reading your own issues into it. You're reading your own discomfort into it. You're reading your own hang-ups and your own insecurities into that person's story. And even if it's true, there's a speck, you probably aren't even seeing clearly. And he says, once your own issues are faced, that allows you to see clearly. And not only just to see clearly, but actually to do what with the speck in that person's eye? Leave it alone? Realize it wasn't there? He says, no, it's there. Now it allows you, because you see clearly, to be able to remove that. There's a call to community in this passage where Jesus is bringing up this beautiful reality that we can all see into each other's lives much more clearly than we see into our own, right? And the reality is that when I look into your life and I can see specks, and when you're able to look into my life and see specks, when we're able to take that posture of generosity, all those planks become specks, right? You can reach in and we can take those out. We can actually love each other. We can actually live in community in a way that we grow, right? Because so many of us are afraid now. Like, either we take this extreme path where we're like, I'm going to speak the truth and I'm just going to like savage everybody, and people just kind of isolate those ones. You know those in church. We don't have those here at all at Fletcher, which is awesome, right? Nary one. And I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I also really kind of mean that, which is a very kind church, honestly. But those people that you know, that you've experienced them, those do tend to get isolated. We know they're harsh and mean, and we're just like, whatever, that's just Susie. She talks that way. That's just Jeff. He's just that way, right? But when we're able to take a posture of kindness, we're actually able to help each other grow. Because the reality is this person probably can't see, just if you start thinking about how eyes work, like you don't notice something that's super close necessarily. You're looking and you can see something at a distance, right? You're like looking past something that's very close to you. And someone else can look past their things and look into your life, and you're able to help each other. There's a story of a lady named Jillian Lynn. And Jillian Lynn was a little girl back in the 1930s when medicine hadn't progressed the same as it has. And everyone just looked at this girl and there's something wrong with her, right? There's something that's just off. And her mother took her to specialist after specialist, and everybody agreed there was something wrong with Jillian, but nobody agreed on what it was. They couldn't figure out a way to fix this kid. And finally, in desperation, Jillian's mother took her to another specialist she'd heard that had worked with children, and kind of this last hope. Took her into our office and explained to the doctor all of the problems they were having, and all the other specialists couldn't figure this out. And the doctor listened closely, kind of heard her out and said, okay, and he looked at the little girl, at Jillian actually, and said, I want to talk to your mom outside for a little bit. Is that okay if you stay in here? I'll turn on the radio, you can listen to some music, and we'll be right back. And Jillian said, oh, sure, okay. And they flipped on the radio, the music starts playing in the room, and the doctor and the mother walk outside, shut the door, and they're looking in through the window. And the mother looks at the doctor, waiting to hear something, and the doctor says, just wait. And they stand there, and they watch Jillian, and she's sitting for a second, and she hops up pretty quickly, and she starts to dance. And she dances and she dances. And the doctor waited for a moment and looked over at the mother and said, "Ma'am, your daughter's not sick, she's a dancer." And so her mother, kind of in like a little bit of hopeful relief, maybe this is true, got her enrolled in ballet classes, and Jillian went on to become one of the most respected choreographers of this century, this last century. She worked for the Royal Ballet. She was the choreographer for Andrew Lloyd Webber's shows. She choreographed Phantom of the Opera. Super successful woman. Like, not only was she not sick, she was hyper talented. But the thing was that she legitimately needed someone to speak into her life as a child and say, "Listen, there's something you can do. There's a direction you can take in your life that you need guided as a child. You're a dancer, you can grow, you can become better and become super successful." So she needed community. This little girl needed someone to speak into her life. The problem was her whole community was speaking into her life in the wrong way. And that's so often what happens in church. We're willing to speak into each other's lives at times, but generally it's those of us who are harsh and unkind, those of us who don't see clearly. We want to speak clarity where there is not clarity. And then those of us who can be generous at times are afraid to speak into it. I don't want to be judgmental. I don't want to tell someone how to live their life. Well, maybe they need you to tell them how to live their life in that moment. There's been moments when people have sat me down and said, "You're being an idiot," and it turned my life in a good direction. It's happened a lot. I know you don't believe that. So the problem is not that we are speaking into each other's lives and challenging each other, removing specks from each other's eyes. It's the problem that we don't see each other generously. And if we're willing to take the posture of Christ, things are very different. A person might not be sick at all, they might just be a dancer, and we can lift them up in our community, and we can find healing for ourselves, we can find healing for each other as we find that community with each other. But finally, Jesus goes on, and he goes into this like really kind of crazy ending to the passage. And I almost left it out when I chose this, but I thought, I might as well make it as hard as possible because I want to learn it. And so I'll just tack that on there and see what happens. And I got scared for a while because nothing was happening. And then I found some interesting stuff. So he says this in verse 6. "So after all this, don't judge. You're going to be judged the way that you judge. Don't look at the speck in their eye when you have a plank." And then he says this, "Don't give dogs what is sacred. Don't throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them, the pearls, under their feet, then turn and tear you to pieces." Like right after he says, don't make these judgments on people, he says, well, if you judge someone to be a pig, don't throw pearls to them. You're like, what? Like if you judge them to be a dog, don't throw holy scraps of meat to them, right? This is super harsh language. In that culture, dogs and pigs would have been the most like unclean, like unrespected animal. You didn't let dogs in your house. Like Jews wouldn't even touch pigs. So this is talking not just about some wild animal. This is like a moral judgment. This is a judgment on this person's character, on who they are, their value. This person's a pig. This person's unclean. This person's a dog. They eat trash. Don't give them meat. They prefer trash. This person's a pig. They're unclean. Don't give them pearls. They'll like mistake them for the acorns they eat and then turn around and gore you with their tusks, right? It's this super like gnarly passage. And I think, first of all, that one thing that Jesus is saying, he says, listen, if you offer good things to the wrong person, is it going to go well all the time? Like if you offer words of encouragement to someone, if you want to tell your little brother how he should change his life, is that always going to go super well? You're going to lean over to your spouse and just help them fix their life. You know, I've really been thinking about how you've been failing recently, and I want to help you become better like me. Are you going to your boss? Listen, I know you're trying hard, but you really are a terrible executive, and I really would like to give you some pointers. Yeah, right? He's like, just because it's true doesn't mean it's going to lead to a great outcome for you, right? So is it okay to use discernment in life? I would say it's okay to use discernment. And so some people, when we hear these don't judge, we get afraid that it's even wrong to make a discerning thought about someone. Like, well, this person has lied to me continually, but I don't want to judge, so I won't be judged, so I'll keep trusting them. He's like, if that person keeps lying to you, maybe don't trust them. Maybe that's okay, right? If you've got someone that's mistreating you continually, If you have someone that's breaking your trust, if you have someone that doesn't do their work and you're nervous to hire them for another job, is that breaking this don't judge commandment? I think Jesus says no, right? Discernment is not judging someone to be worthless. Discernment is deciding, it's making a judgment call, but it's deciding what the best option is for you at that point. What's the smart decision for me to invest my money, the person to tell my secret, the person to risk opening up my heart to? Discernment's okay. Discernment is holy. Jesus himself, it said he didn't reveal himself to men knowing what their hearts were like. Jesus had discernment. And so I want to make sure I don't send you out of here today like feeling guilty. If you're like, yeah, I've been like putting up boundaries between me and this person that's super unhealthy, but I feel like I should take those down because of the sermon today. I'm like, no, don't do that. Like, don't go back to that relationship where the person just keeps messing you up. It's okay to call it off. You know, it's okay to challenge your kids when they're being dumb. So discernment is not judgment. I think that's part of this, what he's saying. He's kind of saying a bit of a response to his own teaching. But I don't think that's it. Because really what that does then, that allows us to basically discount everything that went before, doesn't it? Because all we have to do is think, well, I'm just being discerning. I'm not actually like judging this person. I'm being discerning. And now everything suddenly is permissible, right? Have you found yourself doing that in scriptures? Like you read through all the things Jesus said about love your enemies, like, which is just absolutely pervasive. Then you find one little text that could be a little bit different, like, well, I'm not going to, I know I'm supposed to love my enemies, but, I don't feel like gossiping about this guy and ruining his life is, not loving him. Like, what? Like, we so easily find those ways to just completely discount and ignore the clear teachings of Jesus. And the clear teaching of Jesus here is that we, if we're going to follow Christ's example, are not allowed to look into people's lives and put like a period where there would be a comma in the sentence of their story, right? To look in there and say, okay, this person has been a liar, and so this person has lied, therefore they are a liar. You see the difference? This person has been like irresponsible, therefore they are an irresponsible person. Like this is the value, they have less value, they're not okay. Christ calls us to a higher standard of generosity to people, to not limit people to their worst mistakes, to not limit someone to the worst moments in their life. Because did Christ do that? And that's where I feel like he's getting at something deeper here, because when Jesus was faced with someone like Peter who routinely failed him, what did he ultimately do? Did he just like only limit Peter to what Peter had been? He said, no, Peter, on this rock, this tiny little trembling rock, I'm going to build my church. And he calls Peter to lead the early church. When Jesus is faced with the woman caught in adultery, her bed is still warm, it's so soon. This isn't a woman that's like, man, I was living a rough life and I want to shape up. It's like, no, she was ripped out of a situation violating the laws of Moses, thrown in front of Jesus half naked. And Jesus says, I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. You're good. Don't worry about it. Like what? Don't worry about it? The law of Moses hardly says don't worry about it, right? So the posture Jesus took with people was super generous, was super kind. Like he expected the best out of people. Go and sin no more, right? That was a revolutionary teaching of that time. The Jews thought once you sinned, that's what you were. Jesus is like, she's not a prostitute. She's a woman that made some bad decisions, but she is a beautiful child of God who's made bad decisions. Therefore, she can go and sin no more. Absolutely, she can recover her life. She can be something different. And I don't condemn her in the meantime. And so the posture Jesus takes, the way that he treated people, the reality that we've got this whole teaching here where Jesus is saying, don't judge, don't judge, don't judge. But if you judge someone to be a pig or a dog, this is what might happen, right? And then finally, Peter's vision in the early church. He's been chosen to lead the church, and yet he's still super racist. And we see that over and over and over. Paul calls him out on it at one time, Paul says. And Peter's just struggling with the idea that there are groups of people that maybe are less because of how they were born. They're not in the right group. They're not in the right family. And Jesus gives him this vision of this like bed sheet of animals coming down, right? And he says, go ahead and have some food, Peter. And it's snakes and alligators and all kinds of foolishness. All of the things that were directly prohibited to the Jews to eat. They're all unclean. Comes down over and over and over. Peter's like, no, I won't eat it. I've never even let this stuff pass my lips. I'm a really, really good Adventist, right? Never tasted a drop of alcohol or swine. I'm holy. So what do you say? Yeah, amen, amen, amen. That's not a problem. It's good. Jesus says like, eat this. And Peter's like, come on, man. Like, I know you're ridiculous, but what are you really telling me to do here? I feel like there's more here, Jesus. And Jesus finally says, yeah, there is more. He says it's something a lot deeper than like just eating a pig. He's like, I wouldn't really care if you're eating a pig compared to what your real problem is, Peter. How dare you call unclean what I've made clean? How dare you call a dog what I've called a son? How dare you call a pig, a swine, what I've called a daughter? And Peter gets it instantly. He's like, wow, okay. And this man comes to his house right then and says, there's these Gentiles who want to hear the gospel. And Peter's like, got it. Thanks, Jesus. And he goes directly there. So all of this stuff, and you have Jesus saying, hey, if you judge someone to be a pig, you throw pearls at them, they might turn and gore you. If you judge someone to be a dog and you throw holy meat from the altar to them, yeah, you might get bit. So like, what is he saying? And my best guess, and this is open to interpretation, is that I feel like this might be one of these verbal traps Jesus liked to set up, which is super interesting. It's like the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. You guys remember this one? If you haven't, this is how it goes. There's two men that go to the temple to pray. One's a Pharisee, he's a religious leader, lives a super holy life. And the other is this tax collector, which was someone who basically had sold out their own people, like a turncoat, a traitor, lived probably a pretty gnarly life. So these two go to pray. The Pharisee prays, thank you, God, for making me so holy. I thank you that I'm not like that publican, right? And we're like, oh, what a jerk. And then it goes to the publican, the tax collector, and he says, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And it says he wouldn't even lift his eyes to heaven. And it says he was the one who was forgiven. And so we hear that story, and what do we say? We say, thank God I'm not like the Pharisee. Wah, wah. Jesus is like, got you, right? That's not accidental. And I feel like Jesus maybe is doing a similar thing here. He's like, oh yeah, and by the way, if you judge someone to be a pig or a dog and you cast holy things in their direction, it doesn't go well, by the way, he says. Because there's a lot of like coded language in here. First of all, he says, like, you're just like casting these pearls. Like, is it, who is it on? Whose responsibility is it in that relationship between a pig and a person and the pearls? Who's the idiot here? The pig or the person throwing pearls to a pig? Person or pig? Say person if you think it's person. Say pig if you're wrong. Just kidding. Right? So who's really being indicted here, the person or the pig? It's the person, right? Same thing with a dog. You're going to throw a dog like this holy meat, and that's what this word is. It's talking about like sacrificial meat, like really good, like top quality beef here. No imperfections. Throw that to a dog who's happy with trash. He's like, you're wasting it. That doesn't know the difference. And so I believe he's saying this, that if we judge someone, we look at them and we say, that person is a pig, but I'm going to go ahead and just like throw some like pearls of truth to them. What kind of posture have we taken towards that person? Is it a redemptive posture? You go to someone like, you know what? You're really a terrible, horrible sinner. I'm coming to Asheville to help the pagans today. You know, I'm here to like just tell all you evil pagans dancing in your drum circles about Jesus, you know, because you're worshiping Satan. And, you know, I want to help you out. I'm a giving person, so I'm going to cast these pearls before you. And they're like, oh my word, you're an idiot. Is that person even in the realm of listening to what you have to say? I mean, there's no compassion. You've judged them to be less than you, and you're going to like condescendingly like toss pearls. And that's the language. You're like casting pearls before swine. You've set yourself up. And when we judge someone to be that, he's like, you know what? You might as well not even be throwing these like bits of truth to that person, because at that point you've set yourself up as the giver of pearls and they're a pig. Like you've built this relationship, you've taken this posture that sets you in antagonism to the person you're supposed to be able to minister to, and you're not able to because, right, they might turn and gore you. And it literally says that here. It says they're going to turn around, which means they're walking away from you. Have you watched Christians do this? Like go to any comment section on the internet and you'll watch this. People defending the good news of Jesus in the most visceral, evil language, just like shredding people. You stupid atheists, if you guys really knew what's going on, you just want to like live this terrible life, you're just lying to yourselves. You baby killers. Right? Just this aggressive, visceral attitude that comes out of Christians online. And you wonder who's really kind, who's really following Jesus. I've watched debates before where they'll set up like a Christian, like kind of philosopher, pastor, or someone and this atheist, and they'll start arguing, and it gets nasty. Have you watched that? At times, I'm like, you deserve each other. They're both kind of just nasty and mad, and you're like, just go off in another room. We don't really want either of you, right? My atheist friends are embarrassed of their guy, and I'm embarrassed of this guy. We're like, It's this posture of antagonism that sets me up above you where I could throw pearls and stuff to you, and it changes the whole dynamic. Because the reality is that when we take a posture towards people, not only do we make a decision about what we think of them, it very clearly reveals much more about us than it does the world around us. Have you known someone like that? That nothing can go right for that person. Like everything is this doom and gloom, and you watch and you're like, well, there's bad things happening, but even good things they interpret like bad. It's just this posture of criticism. And you look at Jesus, and this posture of kindness he took towards people not only just revealed who he was, but it called out healing in them, didn't it? Because Jesus was biased towards the weak, towards the sinful, towards the people that the leaders of his day would have called pigs and dogs. Jesus literally was drawn towards them, right? I mean, we read that in the scriptures. And Jesus pursues these people. His response to someone who would be deemed a dog or a pig, unclean, was not apathy, like, well, I'm not going to throw my pearls to you because you're clearly a swine. Jesus' posture towards someone that would have been deemed a pig or a dog, unclean, was active love. He pursued those people. So I feel like Jesus is maybe setting a bit of a trap here when he's like, well, if you deem someone to be a swine, you're like, yeah, I know someone who's a swine. Well, if you cast pearls before them, it might not go well. Yeah, that's right, I won't. Yeah, but what does that make you then? Aren't you therefore setting yourself in judgment of that person? To withhold something holy from them, it reveals more about me than it does about them at that point. I worked at summer camp a lot of times. One of the camps I worked at was in Northern California, up near the Oregon coast. It was a small camp. We only had about 20 staff. We were all college students. There was 0 adults there. And it went much better than you would think, honestly. It was actually not as bad as it sounds. It was a bigger camp that sent the staff they felt were more mature. I got included. I don't know how. But they sent us along to run this camp for like 2 weeks during the summer. Just kind of an outpost kind of thing. Up North California, where it was very poverty-stricken. They couldn't run a full camp because it couldn't support itself financially, and so they just did this kind of as a ministry. So I'm there at this camp. They brought me along, and I was a counselor and one of the admin staff as well. We just kind of ran the thing. And so the kids all came in that week, and it was an awesome camp. It was all set up outside. Like, we slept like outside underneath these trees in Northern California, these giant sequoias. We're just out in this clearing with cots, and the kids had their sleeping bags, and you kind of like get their little thing set up there. And there was a bathroom, which was like one of the only, structures there. So each girl and guys had their little bathroom. So the kids all come that week, set up their stuff, and we go off to do something, and I noticed one of the kids is missing. So I had to take my whole cabin back to get this kid. We walk into the clearing, and all of their sleeping bags are missing. This kid thought it would be funny to take all their sleeping bags and throw them in the bathroom building. So all their sleeping bags are on the floor and dipping into the toilet and, just throwing in there. He thought he was so funny. These kids are like, all right, we're going to, murder this other child this week. It's like the most terrible camper you can imagine. And this is like the first day. I'm like, oh, my word. Well, maybe he'll shape up. He didn't. So there's him. And then in my cabin, there was also like this other really little sweet kid who's like this small for his age, real tiny kid, but the sweetest, nicest little, like just gentle little angel. So he had like demon boy blah, and like angel boy. He had like the two extremes right there in my cabin. And so as the week went on, this, kid starts bothering the little angel kid even more. He sees there's like some like weakness there, and he starts picking on him. And it just kind of was just this incessant kind of like poking at this kid. And one day we were eating lunch. We had to go through and like clean our dishes afterwards. And they had this system where you'd like dip all your stuff in one like kind of tub of water, and you like washed it off. You got in the next one and kind of like actually washed it. The next one you dip it in some like bleach water, and then you're good to go, right? So we're going through, and I dip my tray in here, and it's, I think, haystacks that day. And so the water has become just like this milky white from all the sour cream, and it's got beans and cheese and lettuce and little Frito chips all like melted in there, like just this coagulated goo that's getting nastier by the moment. I'm just like, so gross, like wash it off and move on. And I look to my left as I move on, and what happens next is there's Demon Boy next to me. I tried to keep him close. Next to him was Angel Boy. The great controversy was happening right next to me. And Demon Boy gets this look in his eyes that I recognize. I'm like, oh no, something's about to go down. And I didn't know what it was though. I'm like, wait, what? And this all happened in a split second. He looked at me and he got this look in his eyes. He got, Satan entered his soul. And he took his tray and he dipped it down deep into the murky depths of this coagulated goo, down into the bottom, the sludge. And I'm like, what's he doing? And before I could do anything, he pulls it back out and this just and the whole thing splatters all over Angel Boy, just completely drenches him. And there's tomatoes and lettuce and sour cream on his face, and he's standing there. And Demon Boy thinks he's so funny. And everyone's like, what just happened? Right? So that's day 2. Day 3 comes around. And we had this big thing out in the middle of camp where all the kids would compete and do different games and stuff. And so I've got my cabin out there doing that. I look around, Demon Boy's missing, and I'm like, thank God, maybe he wandered off in the woods and got eaten by a bear. That would be nice. But then I notice also that he's not the only one, that Angel Boy's gone too. And I'm like, oh no, this is going to be bad because I know they're together somewhere and it's not going well for Angel Boy. And then as I notice that, I hear this scream of terror. Over to the side, and I look, and here out of the woods comes a tractor tire rolling, and Demon Boy's behind it, rolling the tire, and inside screaming and crying is Angel Boy. He was not in there by choice, clearly, rolling along. And at that point, I was just done. I'm like, you know what? I'm just done. I can't do this anymore. And this kid also, I back up, he was super violent. He'd run and just jump on me out of nowhere. Just come flying, monkey, right on your face. Oh my word, breaking my teeth. So just really everything he could possibly do that was annoying was annoying. We talked about, sending him home early, but we were giving him time. At that point, I'm like, I'm done. So I walk over, I gave my kids to another staff. I'm like, I gotta go do something. I'm like, get out of that, go, stop. And he's like, what? And he can see I'm angry this time. I'm like, get over here. And he comes walking over with his tail between his legs. He can tell that this time it was a little too much. He's like, no, I'm sorry. I'm like, I don't really care at this point. It's over. We've talked enough. You're going home, man. It's done. He's like, yeah, but I don't want to go home. Like, well, then you should have thought of that when we gave you a million other chances. It's done. And little, Angel Boy goes whimpering back to the cabin, thank God I've been freed from the devil. He's going home. So I grab this kid by the arm and I take him to the this little trailer where we had the office there. We walk in and he's just deflated at this point, which made me feel really good at the time. We win. And I sat him down and I said, call your mom. It's I don't know her number. I'm like, you know your mom's number, but I don't think I remember it. I'm like, well, lucky for us, it's written down in this book, so call this number. It's So he kind of got the phone and started kind of pushing some of the numbers, making mistakes. I'm like, dude, I'm about to dial it for you if you don't do it. Just call your mom and tell her to come get you. You're going home. And he kind of took a breath and just dialed the number. And he held the phone, and it rang, and it rang, and it rang. I'm like, oh no. I've played my hand. What if she doesn't answer at this point? Then we're stuck with him, and he knows he's got nothing else to lose. He's gonna burn the camp down. And it rang and rang and rang. I'm like, please, Jesus, let someone answer this phone. And I heard the click on the phone and a voice there. And he said, Mom, are you okay? Mom, no, it's okay, Mom. Mom, you need to settle down, take a breath. Mom, is he gone? Mom, I told you not to let him back in the house. Okay, Mom, I want you to go to the bathroom and get some aspirin. And I want you to take a drink of water, and I want you to sit down, okay? You need to relax, Mom. It's okay. It's going to be okay. And I stood there in shock, watching this little demon child become an adult right in front of my eyes. And it suddenly became very clear that this child had never been a child, that he was the parent for his parent. that he was the adult, that he was the stability in this home as like an 8 or 9-year-old, maybe 10, I don't know. That he'd lived a life that gave him nothing. He literally didn't know how to play. He thought throwing all their stuff in the bathroom was funny. He thought splashing a kid with like trash juice was hilarious. He thought just like jumping on people was the thing to do. He literally didn't know how to be a child. He'd never been a child. And I stood there just kind of in shock and awe. And I didn't send him home. I let him stay through the rest of the week. And the crazy thing was that like he was still annoying, right? He still jumped on me. He still did some dumb things. But the reality was my heart was completely different. What had changed was not him. What had changed was my posture towards him. Where I had been deeming him a dog and a pig, unclean, just a problem, and everything I did just played into that and made it worse. Once I realized that this was a child deserving of my mercy and kindness, not as much as anyone else, but even more than anyone else there at that camp, that my heart changed towards him completely. And I believe Jesus is challenging us here today that when we find ourselves in that posture of believing someone's unclean, unsavable, that they just need to be sent home, that we want to put a period in their sentence, that's all they are, just get rid of them. That he's calling us to look beyond that and realize there's much more in their story to be written to where we want to put that period. And to take the posture that he takes towards sinners and those unclean, and that's a posture of kindness. And it kind of takes us right to the beginning again, right? Like how you judged, you're going to be judged. What we take in, we tend to give back. And if we're taking in harsh criticism, we're hard on ourselves, we're not able to accept that we're loved and beloved of God, it's going to be hard to extend that, isn't that? Because how we are judged, we tend to judge too. But if we start to bask in the reality that God is not a God that sends us home from summer camp with our tail between our legs, that he's a God that sees into our pain and wants to heal us, that his heart is kind towards us, not in spite of the fact that we're unclean, but because of the fact we're unclean, that maybe we'll stop seeing others as unclean and just casting our ideas and truth at them. It says, judge not that you be not judged. May you have a posture of holy judgment, that you would have discretion, but that in that discretion, when you see a speck in someone's eye, that wouldn't make you deem them unclean, but that would make you more generous, just like God has been to you. May you judge, may you be discerning, and also may you not judge, just the way that God is very much judgmental, but he judges us worthy of his love and affection, where he would literally bleed out for us. May we be known as a judgmental church, a holy judgmental church, where people would know that they're going to be judged, fitting, and loved, and find the kindness of God among us. Amen. God, we thank you that you have judged us so kindly, that though you do see the specks and the logs in our eyes or in our wells in our lives, the ways that our wells are dirty, that God, you feel kindness towards us. God, may our hearts be changed where we would see the world around us with kindness, that we would extend love and generosity into the world, and that would come back to us, God, but not just for that we would do it because that's the way you treat us. May we be known as a very judgmental church, but as a church that judges like you do, Jesus, very, very generously. We love you because you first loved us, and we ask this all in your name. Amen.
We trust your relationship with God has been strengthened from what you have heard today. Please visit our website at www.fletchersda.org. May God give you his peace and joy.